Well, good evening, everyone. I don't want to keep you too long, but I certainly want to thank Aquacal for allowing us to come out and talk with you this evening, or at least virtually talk with you this evening. Jean Marie is my colleague and my handler, so to speak, and she's monitoring the chat. So if you have questions that come up during the conversation tonight, please just type them in, and we'll catalog those, and we'll try to make answers for that towards the end. And we'll also open it up so folks can actually ask questions if they have them as well. Tonight's talk is really going to be a little bit about COVID and about the variants that are out there. And let me grab the remote. I'm Nick Colovos. I'm the BayCare's for the medical director for their quality and experience, and have been an emergency physician for over 25 years. And so this is kind of up my wheelhouse. Here at BayCare, I work with our quality and safety teams to make sure that we're giving the optimal care to our patients, taking care of our team members. And I also work on the customer and team member experience side of the coin. COVID vaccines have been out for almost a year now. They started to come out in early December of 2019, and they've kind of continued to kind of press the luck over the last year or so. So in January and February, they really kind of opened up. Research kind of was completed on those, and they've gone through FDA testing, and they have received FDA emergency utilization. And we'll talk a little bit about those, but the reason I want to talk about the COVID vaccine is to try to give you guys some information so that you can make informed decisions for yourselves and your family and friends as to what you want to do with regard to whether getting a vaccination or not. Also looking at, are masks working? Are they not working? Social distancing, hand washing, all that kind of stuff. So I want to start off by talking a little bit about the COVID, the coronavirus, the SARS-CoV-2 virus that's out currently. You're hearing a lot about the Delta virus, and that's a variant of the initial COVID virus, which was the Alpha. The variants occur in nature. This is a normal thing. I recognize that in our country today, people have kind of stood on one side of the aisle or the other side of the aisle. One side of the aisle is the sky is falling, we're all going to die, let's mask, glove, gown, let's take our vaccines, let's do everything we're supposed to do, lock it down, tighten it up, separate from everybody. And I recognize that group. There's also a group in the population, the second group, which is kind of in that field of, I think this is a government conspiracy, they're trying to take away my freedoms, I'm not doing anything the government says. So I recognize there are those divisions within our country today, and not getting along the political lines. I want to go right down the middle, give you the facts as we know them today, give you the information, and even address anything that you've probably heard from friends or others that are against the vaccination or have thoughts about it or for it, because that helps me understand a little bit more of what's going on out there. The viruses, like I said, can mutate. This coronavirus is no different than any other RNA virus that's out there. They all mutate. It's very similar to our flu viruses, right? It mutates every year, which is why we have to get a shot every year. And they reformulate that every year, usually in the springtime, and then the flu shot is released in September, and people start getting vaccinated with that to protect themselves from getting the flu. Well, this virus is no different. It's hard to say whether it's any worse than the Alpha, but the current data on this shows that it is a little bit more challenging. What we are seeing with it is that the initial virus, when it came out, kind of slow, even though everybody was talking about it spreading pretty quickly. It did spread through the globe pretty fast, but it is a little bit less. It was a little less harmful, I guess you would say, than the Delta, if you want to believe those facts and figures. Today, what do we do with the vaccines? Well, it's important to understand that no vaccine is 100% effective. What this vaccine does today, and when I say this vaccine, I'm talking about either the Moderna, the Pfizer, or the J&J, which is the single shot vaccine. And when I talk about those, what I'm saying is that these vaccines were studied to see if they reduce the symptoms in folks, lessen the severity of disease so that people don't end up in the hospital. So what that means is if you get the vaccine, yeah, you can still get COVID, you can still carry COVID, you can still spread COVID, you can still get sick with COVID, but the hope is you won't die from COVID. And that's kind of the thing that has been missed a little bit, I think, out in the public. When we talk about variants, the World Health Organization several months back was looking at this. You might have remembered it being called as the Wuhan virus. We had viruses that were variants coming out of the United Kingdom and out of Africa and Brazil, and we were calling them all by these country names and stuff. And that probably wasn't real beneficial to folks. People really started stigmatizing these viruses with particular nationalities. And that's not really fair because these coronaviruses are everywhere. But regardless of where they came from or where they started, what they've done is they've named them using the Greek alphabet. So today, the variant that we're really concerned with is the Delta virus. It did start in India, it spread to the UK, and then finally to the United States. When we look at the spread of this Delta variant, it's important to understand how contagious it really is. If you'd have gotten one of the early variants in the very first beginning of COVID, one person being infected, a cough or a shout out or an exposure would typically infect 2 to 3 other people. Today, with this Delta variant, one person being infected will actually infect up to 7 to 8 other people. So that's what we mean by it's being more contagious. The other thing that we're seeing with it is that more young people are getting infected because we suspect that's probably due to the fact that the older population, the immune compromised population, were the first that got vaccinated back in January and February, if you remember. And so we really attached the vaccine to the vulnerable population within the United States. We've seen a slow progression of people getting vaccinated, slowly picking up, but that's taken a tremendous effort throughout the country. And that's the bit of the challenge that we're faced with right now. Studies are now showing that the Delta virus can make you sicker than the previous variants. So the problem with it is it's more contagious. Young people are getting it, probably because they're not vaccinated. And also it's making you sicker quicker. And what we see in the hospitals within Florida and elsewhere is, especially here in Florida, about 80% of the admissions to the hospital due to COVID are in the unvaccinated population. Now, I don't want to call this a pandemic of the unvaccinated, but that's what we're seeing right now. The other challenge with this is we also are seeing that those deaths within the hospital are occurring in those younger age groups between 30 and 50 years of age, which we had not seen before. So that's very disconcerting to a lot of us working in the hospital industry. The Delta variant has really upended a lot of our assumptions about the coronavirus and how it can be spread and the infectivity that's out there. And so I really just want to make sure everybody understands that as viruses go through replication, a virus is nothing more than a recipe. It's in a Ziploc bag. It's a recipe in a Ziploc bag. So let's say that recipe is for chocolate cake. You can't make that chocolate cake unless I hand you the recipe and say, here, follow this, right? So in our bodies, we get these viruses in us by touching something that's contaminated. It could be a desktop, it could be a door handle, it could be a telephone receiver, something that we touch, right? Or maybe we walk past somebody who's just coughed or sneezed and their spit is still in the air. Those aerosolized droplets are still in the air. That's what we call spittle, okay? And then we'll come back to that in just a minute. So you get this on your hands, you get it through your mouth, your nose, you inhale it, and that's how we usually get these viruses into us. Once the virus gets in, it attaches to our cells. In this case, the coronavirus uses a really unique little device. It's called the spike protein, and that's what you see all around the surface of the vaccine, or the spikes. Those spikes on that actually give it the look of a corona, meaning a sun. If you've ever looked at a sun that's been eclipsed, you got the black dot in the middle and you got the rays of sun around it, that's called a corona. And so under electron microscopes, that's what they saw, which is how the virus got its name, coronavirus. So that being said, that spike protein attaches to one of your cells. That is kind of like taking the key to the front door of your house from you. So I have the key to the front door of your house, I put it into that lock and I turn the lock and I can open the door and get inside. That's exactly what that spike protein is doing. And so that opens the door, it allows the virus to enter inside of the cell. And in particular, the messenger RNA, that recipe for that chocolate cake, enters inside of that cell. It then takes over and it kind of tells the cell, hey, I want you to make more of me. And that's what the cell starts to do. The virus is actually inert, it's dead. And that's why if you go to your doctor during the flu season and they say, oh, you have a cold virus, and you're like, hey, where's my antibiotics? They're going to be like, you don't need antibiotics. Antibiotics work really, really well against bacterial infections because bacterial infections are alive. I can kill them with an antibiotic. But when it comes to the viruses, I can't kill that with an antibiotic. It just doesn't work. And so when you're told that you've got a virus and you don't get an antibiotic, don't be disappointed, because we're actually trying to practice really good medicine by doing that, because we're not building up immunity to those antibiotics. And we want them to work when you actually do get an infection that requires an antibiotic. So in this circumstance, the virus gets inside the cell. The cell reads the recipe and it starts making additional viral particles. Those viruses start to replicate like crazy in there. And every time the virus replicates, there's always a chance that it could make a mistake. It could have a little mistake in it. And when that mistake occurs, most of the time, it doesn't result in anything at all. But there are times where that mistake occurs and it causes the production of a more virulent, a stronger virus to be replicated. And that's the case of these variants and how they're produced. So if you think about it in the common sense framework, it's kind of like, well, if I can prevent the virus from reproducing itself, then it's not going to have the opportunity to make those mistakes. And I might actually kind of extinguish this or at least slow it down a little bit. And so that's the principle behind vaccination. In addition, when we give you the vaccine, you get a little piece of a recipe. And that's the recipe for that spike protein. It's the recipe for the key to the front door of your house. And so what we try to do with that is we want the cell to make a bunch of those keys. And so those keys pop out of the cell, they spread throughout your circulation, and you have the development of antibodies. Those are created when the body goes, hey, wait a minute, I don't recognize this. This doesn't belong here. And so they start to attach and bind, and you get this antibody response, and that hopefully develops an immunity. So what do the antibodies do when you become infected with one of these virus particles? So the virus gets into you because you coughed, you sneezed, you wiped your face, whatever you did, you get the virus inside of you, starts circulating around. Our antibodies that are there from the vaccine recognize this spike protein and go, hey, this thing doesn't belong. And so they attach to that spike protein. And the hope is that that prevents it from being able to enter into a cell and self-replicate again. Everybody got me? So that antibody is kind of similar to if I was to take a wad of chewing gum and put it on the front door of your lock, you couldn't get your key in there because it was all gummed up. And so that's why we're trying to prevent it with this vaccine. Remember that all of these variations are very common in nature. It goes right to Darwin's publication, The Origin of the Species, where he says the fittest survive, right? The strong survive. So that's kind of the way the world operates for the most part. Now, what you've probably been hearing in the news, and I know this afternoon or this evening, the president was on talking about a whole bunch of stuff with COVID. I've kind of picked up on most of it. But what I really wanted to bring to your attention is that the talk of boosters and would they be helpful? What we have seen and what has been approved by the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, and this is a body of physicians and scientists that make the decisions on when we should give you the tetanus shot or the pneumonia vaccine or all of these kind of things. And what they came out with in July is they recommended that for those patients that have immunocompromised, they should be looked at as a possible candidate for a third vaccine. So most of these folks got 2 vaccines, right? They got either 2 Moderna or they got 2 Pfizer. J&J was out there, but there's no recommendation on the J&J yet as far as a booster in this group goes. And so what they identified was they said, you know, if you've got somebody that's immunocompromised, maybe this is an individual that has a transplanted kidney, right? A donor kidney. And we've got to put them on medication to knock their immune system down so it's not operating like yours and mine or a healthy individual. individuals. And so these folks don't develop the immune response or the one adequate enough from the first two vaccines. So they're being directed to take this third vaccine. And so that's where we think this may be of some benefit. Okay. And these folks also, it's important for them to avoid close contacts and to stay out of crowds and wear masks and stay 6 feet apart and do all the things that you continue to hear us generate within the public spaces. So this is that type of booster vaccine. I don't even like calling it a booster, because a true booster is due to the fact that you were given a vaccine and the vaccine decreased in its efficacy over a period of time. Think of the tetanus shot that you may have gotten at your physician's office, right? You go to the doctor, they check you out, they go, when was your last tetanus? You go, oh, it's been a little over 10 years. And they go, you know what? You need another one because they only last about 10 years. So you get a booster for the tetanus. You have some protection, but it's kind of gone down over the years. And we know that by 10 years, you need that shot. Flu, you need a shot every year. Why? Because we know that the flu virus changes every year, and we make predictions in the spring as to what's going to happen in the fall. If we're accurate with that prediction and we make the right vaccine, we don't have an epidemic of flu. But if we're wrong, we end up having an epidemic of flu, and the vaccine doesn't seem to work, and everybody's mad at each other, and they keep telling me that, oh, I got the vaccine, but I still got the flu. Remember, not all vaccines are 100% protective. So that's really important to keep in mind. The other avenue of boosters that you may be hearing in the news is that people are making some recommendation. When I say people, I'm talking about the CDC and the federal government, that if you've gotten a vaccine of Moderna or Pfizer and you're 8 months out from the time you initially got it, that you may require another vaccine to kind of boost your immunity. I think it's really too premature to do that. The science doesn't support that. And the data on it is very scarce right now. And there's a lot of controversy out there. So this is kind of splitting right down the middle to those two groups that I mentioned earlier. So I'm a fan of kind of wanting to see where the science takes us. And we'll know more, hopefully by the end of the year, as we've got a whole population in the United States as well as other countries, and we're able to follow and observe some of those results that we're seeing from the initial vaccination. So let's talk a little bit about the vaccine and go over some of the frequently asked questions that I've kind of gotten over about the last 590 days of this pandemic. Just spoke a little bit about COVID-19. There are 3 vaccines that are out there currently. The Pfizer vaccine, which is a 2-dose vaccine, was fully FDA approved on August 23rd. Prior to this date, it fell under emergency use authorization. This was the EUA that everybody talked about. The 3 vaccines, both Pfizer, Moderna, and the Johnson & Johnson, fell under an EUA when they first came out. They were not approved by the FDA. So a little bit of a misnomer. The FDA said, listen, this is a really terrible disease. We've got this medication that's shown it's safe. And we think that the risk of leaving the disease as it is without treating it is greater than any risk the vaccine could produce. So in those circumstances, for public health purposes, it was released on an EUA. Currently, Pfizer went through a reapproval process with the FDA, and the FDA said, yep, you get our stamp, you are safe. So it is the only FDA-approved vaccine in the United States. Now, to caveat that, Moderna has submitted an application for a similar review by the FDA. And I suspect that probably later this year, in the next several months, Moderna will probably receive approval through the FDA as well. J&J will probably submit their application closer towards the end of the year, and we may hear something from them by the first of the year. So just something to bear in mind as we kind of go through this process. Will there be more variants after Delta? Well, I hate to tell you that if you missed out on Delta, there's others out there that are coming. Lambda variant originated in Peru, and it's recently taking some hold in the surrounding areas. There have been cases noted in the US of this, and it's being watched, but it is not on the World Health Organization watch list. The watch list that's created by the World Health Organization is very much like the FBI's 10 most wanted. Those are the bad guys. Those are the ones that we really are looking out for. We want to catch those and make sure we're following them. The Mu variant is now in 49 of our 50 states. If you want to avoid it, go to Nebraska. It's the only state that hasn't reported it. The Mu variant came up through through Colombia, South America, and as it came in, it probably came in via route of South Florida, actually, through Miami, because a lot of travel in that area. Some of the concerns that have been presented by this is that we think it may be able to evade the current vaccinations that are out there. In addition, the current therapies may not be useful against it. That's very, very early data. So don't hang your hat on that just yet. But those are the concerns. That's the sky is falling stuff you may be hearing on the news in the weeks to come. I think we've got to wait until the data, because there's not a whole lot of cases right now. It is in the United States, and we've got to kind of see where it is. The advantage that we can take of all of this right now is that the quicker we get people vaccinated, the less opportunities variants have to develop, because what are we doing? We're decreasing their ability to replicate, to reproduce in us. While I said initially, you get the vaccine, you can still get infected with the COVID, you can still carry it, you can still be asymptomatic, you can get symptomatic, you can have the disease, you can still go to the hospital, but the hope is that you have lessened symptoms and you don't die from it. So we can do some of that. So the more unvaccinated people there are out there, I would have the expectation that more variants will be to come. So just something to be aware of. What about boosters? We kind of talked about that already. Hopefully have some understanding with that. There's some studies both out of Israel as well as out of New York and elsewhere. The MMWR, which is the Morbidity Mortality Weekly Report on deaths and dying in the United States. They report on a lot of information that has to do with both vaccines as well as a lot of other things. They report on traffic accidents and all this kind of stuff. Well, they came out with a report recently that said, you know what? Maybe this vaccine that we're giving folks kind of decreases with time. You know, its response decreases with time. And there's probably truth to that. We know that vaccines already do that. I mean, it's in the textbook. So there's no sense to think that the one shot and done is going to work. And so I do think boosters are probably going to be in our future. I just think that it's a little premature, and the data's a little light to make that leap of faith into boosters. You're not going to prevent people from getting the cold with coronavirus. You're not going to keep people from getting sick, right? What we're doing is we're preventing them from having to go to the hospital and have severe disease where they get put on a ventilator and potentially die. So we're not going to get to the point where nobody's going to get sick with this virus. It's here to stay. It's going to be a part of our lives forever. It's not going away. So just keep that in mind as we kind of go through that pathway. Now, we have seen within the hospitals, along with that 80% of unvaccinated that we're seeing, which is the vast majority, we are seeing patients that are coming into the hospital that are what we call breakthrough patients. These are folks that were fully vaccinated, but ended up with a COVID infection and required hospitalization for additional care. Most of these patients are what we define as immunocompromised, meaning they've got chronic health problems. Obesity, hypertension, high cholesterol, they got diabetes. They've got medical issues that are further compounding their immune system. And so the problem with it is they're having these breakthroughs. The good news is they're not impacting the death rate. We're not seeing people die that frequently in this population as we did last year. And so our treatments and stuff have gotten much better. Our hope is with these vaccinations is, like I said before, we're hoping that by getting vaccinated, you don't end up getting hospitalized and you don't die. So that's really where we're looking with this. But there are breakthrough cases. They take up about 16 to 20% of current hospital admissions for COVID, compared to the 80% of the younger group that's unvaccinated being admitted to the hospitals. So if I already had COVID-19, do I still need to get a vaccine, right? Well, this is a big question. I understand natural immunity. It's a good thing. Bear in mind that when you get a COVID infection, you will develop some natural antibodies, what we call neutralization antibodies, if you recover from the virus. Okay, you're going to have that. That's going to happen. It was a foreign body in your, it was a foreign material in you, and so therefore your body is going to set up some protections for you. So you do get antibodies against it. And there's arguments pro and con for whether you should get vaccinated or not. I'm going to give you my thoughts on this. Currently, if you get vaccinated, we're vaccinating you so that you produce the spike protein, a single protein of the virus, because we know that single protein is the key to the front door to the house. If you have a natural infection and you recover, you're going to have some natural immunity. Now, there are 28 proteins that make up this virus. The vaccine only does one of those. So you'll have some additional antibodies to cover other things on this virus, but most of the other things on the virus don't do anything. So it isn't going to do you much good if we have an issue with this spike protein. So we don't know how long natural protection will be. I do think it's a good thing. I think natural immunity is not a bad thing, but the problem with it is we don't know how long it lasts. How many folks do you know where they might have been sick for a few days and they go, yeah, I think I had COVID, and they don't go to get the vaccine? Well, one, they don't really know if they had COVID, but let's say they did. We know that immunity is based on the viral load that your body undergoes. If you were like one of my family members, one of my 8 family members that came down with COVID, well, if you were the 27-year-old nephew of mine who spent 4 weeks in the hospital, 10 days of which were in the intensive care unit, I'd say, yeah, you probably got pretty good immunity. You got a huge viral load. I was planning for your funeral. Thank God we didn't have to go through with that, right? But you probably got a huge viral load, and you've got probably fairly strong immunity to that, okay? So that's one. If you're somebody that just had a couple, maybe a week of illness, you could still have a good viral load that produced that, but we just don't know. And so, yes, following an infection with COVID and recovery, you will have antibodies to the virus, but we just don't know how long they last because that wasn't studied. What we do know was studied was what that immunity looks like when you're vaccinated. And so there's a couple of studies out there, and one recently in July actually demonstrated that people who have had the COVID infection and recovered and went and got the COVID vaccine actually have a boost in their immune system to where they're probably kind of super protected. And so strongly recommend that you get vaccinated if you've recovered from COVID-19. I think the data and the research out there is supportive of that. Now, you can find papers and people on the other side that say, no, don't do that. I'm telling you from what I've read and the data I've looked at, I've recommended it to my family members. I have 8 family members, all of which came down with COVID. One was hospitalized. One took 6 weeks to recover at home on home oxygen, and me calling him twice a day to make sure he was improving. And that was my brother. And then I have a daughter and now a son-in-law who both had really bad COVID, but didn't have to be hospitalized. They were in the younger age population. And I recommended the vaccine to all of them once they recovered. So I think that decision that I made was based on the information available at hand. My daughter just recently got married at the end of July, and her and her new husband, they're interested in starting a family, right? So she had concerns, and we'll get into it a little bit, but she had concerns about fertility. I don't think there's any issues with that. I'll talk a little bit more on it in a minute, but I didn't find a reason why we shouldn't vaccinate her. So that's where I'm just going to kind of leave that. And if you have questions, we can come back to them. So I'm fully vaccinated. Do I need to wear a mask? Well, this is a big thing, right? This is really political. You got schools saying mandate the mask and don't do it and do it. And everybody's kind of crazy about it. Let's kind of put things into perspective. The surgical mask that you see here hanging onto this COVID vaccine vial is probably one of the better ones that you can wear. And it's what we wear in our healthcare arenas. Here at BayCare, all of our team members wear these masks. We require it within our clinics because we want to protect our patients. We want to keep them safe. And so we do everything we can, from cleaning the rooms before and after patients are in them, to wearing these masks, to making sure we're wearing protective eyewear and going through all of these procedures to kind of offer as much protection as we can. We wear these masks, we're very careful about how we wear them, how they're fit around our face so that they're tight, they're snug. We're not grabbing the mask from the front end, to recontaminate ourselves. So we're very careful about that. The other masks that you might have seen are the cloth masks that are out there. Typically, those were initially thought to be very good, and they should have been somewhere about 3 layers, like 2 layers of cotton on the inside and then maybe a polyester lining on the outside. That polyester is a repellent for fluids, but it also creates a little bit of a static electric charge. So the small parts of the virus that you potentially could get through that cloth would be attracted by that electrostatic charge and maybe not get all the way in you. The third is what you see as the gaiter. I use this all the time when I'm out fishing, right? It's the one that you have around your neck that you pull up around your face to prevent you from getting sunburn. Excellent choice against sunburn. Horrible choice if you're trying to prevent COVID. Here's the deal with all of these masks. These are just tools in our toolbox. They act as barriers. They prevent you from having that spittle. That's the moisture that you spit out when you cough, when you laugh, when you speak, when you talk, when you yell, when you scream, right? It prevents you from dispersing that out. The mask helps prevent you from doing that. Part of the challenge with all of these masks is that they have to be worn very correctly. Like I said, top of the line is probably the surgical mask here. We do have another one that we go to, the N95, that you guys have probably heard about. That's the best mask out there. It has to be fitted to your face. If you go to Home Depot and buy one of those and you just go, oh, this looks good, I'm going to wear this, and I see people wearing it all the time, the problem with it is you were never fitted for it. If you do that, yeah, it's great if you're going to do some carpentry work and some sanding and painting and stuff like that, but it's probably not going to keep anything out. In addition, you'll see at some of those masks, they have a little valve on the side of them. Well, that valve is so that the person wearing it can breathe easier. So you exhale and all your exhalation goes through that valve. Where does that valve usually point? Right at people or downward, right? So you're not doing anybody any benefit by wearing one of those masks in public because you haven't been properly fitted for it, and you got to be really careful taking it on and off. I'd say, probably don't need to have that unless you've been actually fitted for it. The surgical masks are available. They work pretty well. None of these masks are fail-safe. 70% of what you breathe is going to come through the mask. 30% of what you breathe is going to come through the sides of the mask. I think some of the data out there says these are anywhere between 20 to 30% effective when worn correctly. And I see a lot of people out there not wearing them correctly. No fault to anybody's. I mean, I've been wearing these things for almost 30 years. So I hope I know how to put the doggone thing on. There's a lot of folks that haven't done that for some time. So something to be aware of. So when you think about COVID vaccine and the safety within pregnancy and breastfeeding and those kind of things, I would tell you with this. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists have announced overwhelmingly, and this was at the end of July of this year, that a thorough review of the data has demonstrated that it is safe to administer this vaccine during pregnancy. The other key part of this was that studies have demonstrated that women who are in their first trimester of pregnancy, if they get COVID, the actual infection, that there is a higher risk of losing the pregnancy. So that's a big concern. The COVID-19 virus also has had some complications causing preterm delivery. And so those are some concerns that we have out there. The vaccination actually lowers both of these risks significantly. And so if you're a mom or looking to be a mom, the mothertobe.org is a great organization to kind of log into, and you can get some personalized information on COVID-19, has all kinds of information on there. But I would tell you that the studies currently show that it's safe. And I have this administered to both of my daughters. So I think it's the appropriate thing to do right now. When you look at current treatments, we've come a long way from a point where we didn't know what we were doing and we were throwing everything at people, from hydroxychloroquine to ivermectin to vitamin D to zinc, all this kind of stuff. These have not really been shown to be very effective. Now, I know you're going to pull up, or your colleagues or friends or family are going to pull up a Facebook article and go, look, this one says this thing works great. Yeah, but you got to look at those studies. One, most of the studies out there that say they work great are very small in number, and meaning that you might have a doctor that's been practicing, and I had one that I read lately that he had 5 patients, right? He gave these medications to his 5 patients, all of which he documented were positive for COVID, but were feeling just fine. And he said they never got sick. Well, we don't know if they would have gotten sick. That's not an appropriate study. I'm glad they didn't, but giving somebody a medicine and then not seeing an end result from it doesn't teach us anything. So you really need some controlled studies. There are some of those going on currently. And right now, I can tell you that the challenge with these is it's not bearing fruit. So a lot of these are anecdotal studies, and they're what we call observational studies. Observational studies is I give you a peanut M&M, and I see if you like it. And if you like it, you'll come back and get another one. But if you don't like it, you won't come back and get another one. Well, that's not a great study, right? That's an observational study. Maybe you like it, but you just full and you don't want it anymore. So I can't make those assumptions. The items that you see as you're looking at the screen to your left that are not effective, we've been able to prove that pretty well. If you want to take some vitamin D or vitamin C or zinc or melatonin, yeah, you can go for it. Talk with your physician, talk with your doctor first about it. Don't go out there thinking I'm going to take high doses of all of this stuff because it's going to prevent me from getting COVID or it's going to help me get over COVID. Talk with your healthcare provider. I've seen people that have overdosed on zinc, and then they come in and they go, I can't smell or taste anything. Yeah, that may or may not return, and it's probably not due to COVID. It's due to the fact you've been slamming zinc so much. So we do know that these vitamins and minerals like zinc do have some impact on our immune system, but it's not well studied to see if it's really a causation correlation kind of thing. So just be careful with those. Azithromycin is something that folks have asked for. They go, I'm positive for COVID. Write me a prescription for azithromycin. Azithromycin, also known as a Z-Pak, is an antibiotic. It's a 5-day course. Some of you may have had this in the past for infections in your lungs. This is an antibiotic. It works very, very well against bacterial infections, specific bacterial infections. However, if you have COVID, you have a virus. Now, sometimes we do prescribe this to people that have COVID. It's because we believe they have a secondary infection. You got the virus that knocked your immune system down. You're not feeling great. You're getting worse. We take an X-ray. We go, oh, you have pneumonia on top of this. We'll treat the pneumonia with the azithromycin. And so that's something to think about. So not everybody should be being put onto these medications unless there's a true reason for it. Otherwise, we're going to build up immunity to these antibiotics. And when we really need it, they're not going to work. And we already have a number of antibiotics in the world today that have been abused so much that they don't work. And there's infections out there that are really caustic. When you look at the effective ones, Regeneron treatment, this is the monoclonal antibody. There are 2 monoclonal antibodies that make this up. It was engineered, and this is shown to be very, very effective. There are state sites around, and particularly here in Florida and elsewhere, where if you have COVID or you suspect you have COVID, you can go to the site, you can be tested. If you test positive for COVID and you meet the criteria, you may be eligible to receive this treatment. What we do know is that patients who are COVID positive with mild to moderate symptoms that receive this treatment in a timely fashion reduce their hospitalization and severity of disease by about 67%. So that's the latest data that's out there on that. So this is shown to be very effective. And so you're seeing everybody going out there with it now, okay? Dexamethasone is a steroid, and we use this in individuals who basically are in the hospital having respiratory breathing problems. This helps to reduce inflammation. And so it's used in the hospital setting for very severe folks. It's not going to be something your doctor is going to write you for. And remdesivir, you might have been familiar with this from last year when President Trump was treated with this. This is an antiviral medication. It has been shown to be effective, but it's usually used only on those hospitalized patients when they're very, very severely ill. The last thing I want to talk about is, or on this slide, is really with relationship to two things that we're seeing. One is called long haulers, and the other is called long syndrome. They're one and the same. If you live in Florida, they call it long haulers. If you live anywhere else in the country, they call it long syndrome. This is what happens, we see, when people have had a COVID infection and recover. This causes some people, and we don't know why, to kind of have a foggy brain. You know, it's a cognitive. They're not thinking quite right. Things just don't feel right. And these symptoms can last for months. It's being studied currently, but nobody has really great data right now to say what's the cause or what's the cure. And so this is something that we're really worried about. The reason we're worried about it is because we're seeing it in patients, and the patients that are most at risk for getting COVID are the unvaccinated ones, right? And so that's what we're really worried about. In addition, just for your information, if you're not vaccinated and you get COVID, you have twice as likely a chance of coming down with COVID a second time. So that goes back to that natural immunity that we acquire, and the fact that maybe we don't have the immunity that we need to protect us from maybe that spike protein. So something to think about. Some myths and facts. We kind of went through all of these already. I'm going to jump right down to the fourth one on the myth side. It's COVID vaccines contain microchips and tracking devices. No, they do not. This actually came from some articles where people were talking about nanoparticles being injected into you. A nanoparticle is getting injected into you with Moderna and with all the vaccines. What they didn't tell you was that nanoparticle is a little piece of fat. What we know from the research that was done on this vaccine was that these vaccines, by the way, this technology has been out for 20 years. This isn't the first coronavirus. We had SARS and we had MERS, right? So they've been working on coronaviruses and trying to figure out how to prevent them and how to stop them and decrease symptoms and all that stuff for at least the last 12 years. So this is not new technology. But what they did identify through the research was when I inject mRNA, messenger RNA, that recipe for that chocolate cake into you, when I inject that into you, your body destroys it almost instantaneously. It doesn't last very long at all. So they came up and they figured out, well, if I take a little piece of fat, a fat molecule, and I wrap it around that and I inject it, guess what? It stays long enough to where it can be absorbed into one of your cells, and then that replicates that spike protein. Pretty cool kind of science stuff, right? Well, they took from the articles that were talking about microchips and tracking devices and nano machines being injected into you. They took that from the one research, I suspect, where they were talking about nanoparticles. So the nanoparticle is a really small piece of fat that they wrap this thing in. It's microscopic in size, so you're not going to see it very well at all. But that's what they needed to be able to do to make this successful. So just something to think about. I've also heard folks tell me that they become magnetic after it. Usually the folks that have told me that, and I don't mean to make fun of anyone, I've usually, when I'm talking to them, for some reason they're standing next to a bunch of metal tools, and I don't see the tools flying off the wall and sticking to them. So I don't think there's any truth to that. I always think that we've got to look at the science behind it. There's nothing in the vaccine that's going to cause you to become magnetized. Now, I'll be honest with you. There was some concern that this was going to change or alter your DNA. Well, the facts are that it did not alter, it doesn't alter your DNA. I wished it had, because I was kind of looking for a superpower when I got vaccinated, but I really didn't get one of those things at all. And once again, the vaccines do not affect men's or women's fertility. I can tell you that having gotten COVID before the vaccine was horrible. I got vaccinated. Having COVID after the vaccination that I received lasted about 2 days, not a big deal. So maybe I was one of the lucky ones, okay? And I still think that when people talk about the face mask, if you're in a confined space with other people and you're pretty close, just remember, it's just another tool in the toolbox. The social distancing, the hand washing, the wearing of the face mask, those are the things that are just tools in the toolbox, along with the vaccination, to kind of reduce the chances of this virus spreading. On this slide, it just kind of gives you some areas to go to for some vaccine information. I have a BayCare site that you can go to as well. I think that if you want to go to a couple of sites, certainly BayCare, we put all the latest, greatest stuff out there, including information on the Mu variant and those types of things. Our information comes from the CDC, NIH, World Health Organization. We pull from Johns Hopkins as well as the Mayo Clinic. All of those things are real reputable resources. So check them out if you feel like you can't sleep at night and you want to be able to do something a little bit more. If you want to visit our BayCare site, it's baycare.org /coronavirus, and that website has some of the latest news on it. So with that, I'm going to open it up for some questions. Want to hear from you folks and tell me what you think and what's on your minds, and if you have any questions, or maybe you have a family member that doesn't want to get the vaccine. I'd love to understand and know why maybe that is. You know, I don't think we should start to think of people as being dumb or stupid because they don't want to do one thing or the other. I think it's a very personal decision, and I don't think people are dumb, stupid, or naive. I think it's just a matter of us trying to figure that out, understand that a little bit more. Questions?
I have some questions for you. The first one I want to start with is to talk a little bit more about the vaccine and the mRNA technology. If this technology has been around for 20 years, they want to know why hasn't it ever been approved for use against the virus before the Operation Warp Speed, and how did that move so quickly?
Yeah, when you look at vaccines, let me just start out by saying that there are about 300 or so vaccines out there right now. Only 3 of them have received even temporary approval by the FDA, and they're the ones that are in our country. One of them, Pfizer, got full FDA approval, and I suspect the other 2 are going to get that as well. So that's where you're at. Vaccines are really, really hard to get approved because they're really, really hard to do. The mRNA technology has been around for about 20 years or so. Some of the early research started in the 1960s. They did look at using this for the Zika virus. They have looked at it for Ebola. They have looked at it for some of the other viruses like hepatitis and those types of things out there. The challenge with it is those haven't had the public health threat that this one produced, that this particular virus produced. The benefit behind all of this and what seems to be the warp speed and the rapid nature of all this is I want you to put into perspective. Zika affected the United States and some of South America, but it didn't affect the world. And so there wasn't that surge to do it. When this pandemic broke and it was spreading across the world, what happened is researchers around the world kind of opened up their laboratories and shared the information that was out there. And that's what really helped everybody to engage. It's kind of like if we're going to take a test together and all 30 of us are in the same room, but we're not allowed to look at each other's paper. Some of us might do really well, some of us might do very poorly. But if we all work together as a team to find the answers, we're probably going to work a lot better at that. The other thing about all of this is the fact that we are able to do genomic mapping. More than 2 decades ago, we were able to map the human DNA, right? Well, now you can map these viruses in a matter of weeks versus a matter of months and years. So some of that technology has been advanced to the point that it's really beneficial. So you just kind of had an alignment of the stars. I agree. Vaccines typically take sometimes 3 to 5 years to come out. In this case, because of the technology advances, because this was not cold and it was already being worked on, and because of the sharing of information, I think those were the 3 main contributors to getting this vaccine out so quickly. In addition, I understand that in parallel with the vaccine development, they also paralleled that with the production of the vaccine. Some in the past would do the research until you figured out a good vaccine. And then once you figure it out, you go, okay, how do we produce mass quantities of this, right? And so then you develop that. So the vaccine may take a couple of years to do, and then it takes you another year or two to figure out the production. So it really has a longer point of time. With this vaccine, both the vaccine development and the production of that vaccine ran in parallel. So by the time they got to the end with the right vaccine, they were able to put it into production a lot quicker. And I think that probably contributed greatly to the speed with which this came out. So you're looking at 18 months for the production of this vaccine. It went through all three phases of the trial. It went through lab, it went through animal, and it went through human trials. It's really hard to get into a phase 3 trial if you can't show that it's safe in everything beforehand. And it's very difficult to get a vaccine out in human trials if you can't show that it's at least 50% efficacy. So that's kind of where you are with it. It's really difficult. I wouldn't want to be in the vaccine business because it's just really one of the most challenging things in medicine to do. Next question.
All right, I'm going to combine two here because they have a little similar feel. You talked about how that if I'm vaccinated, yes, I can get sick. Yes, I can transmit. Yes, I can catch it. Or is there anything out there that shows that if I am vaccinated, maybe I have a little less chance of catching it, period? Or is it just going to diminish my symptoms? And then there's a secondary question here asking about, transmission. If I'm vaccinated, am I less likely to be transmitting it than if I was non-vaccinated?
Great questions. Let's clarify. If I give you the vaccine 2 weeks after the vaccination, you are considered to have antibody development and have some immunity develop. Okay, we're talking healthy, young people like me. So you got the vaccine, you're somewhat healthy. So yes, you can still get COVID. You can be asymptomatic and carry it. You can be symptomatic and carry it and kind of spread it through cough and stuff. You can become very ill and you could even end up with hospitalization, and some may even die. When you get the vaccination, the benefit of the vaccine is that it reduces the symptoms that you have from the infection, which therefore hopefully prevents you from having to go into a hospital. That's what this vaccine was studied for. They were looking for a vaccine that would reduce the symptoms so there'd be fewer people going into the hospital, and that would lessen the burden on our healthcare system. Okay, so that's the facts as they lay out there. The best vaccine in the world, if you wanted to develop one, would be, I want to give you a shot of this, and you're never going to get this disease. You're never going to carry this disease. You're immune to this disease. That's called sterile immunization. Don't confuse that with can't have babies. That means that your immune system is going, yeah, that thing ain't never coming back. We have closed, we've changed the lock on the door, not coming back, right? And we've got some vaccines out there that have more or less kind of done that, right? Polio is an example of that. The vaccine for polio. When's the last time you saw a case of polio in the United States or in most places of the world? Remember, in August of just last year, polio was a disease we discovered in the 1900s, but we really brought it to its forefront in the 1950s, where in the United States, we were having the same debate. Which vaccine should I get? Is one better than the other? People were really confused. Thank God there wasn't social media, and people just went and got vaccinated. So we were able to control that pretty well. In August of last year, the World Health Organization declared that Africa was wild polio virus free. That was in 2020. We saw this vaccine in 1950. Currently in the world, only Afghanistan and Pakistan are the only places where wild polio still exists. So it's going to take a long time to get a vaccine that prevents it from occurring altogether, because you can't knock it out. There are other vectors out there. This is in the animal vectors, right? So I got to go kill all the animals so this thing doesn't come and get me, right? That's just not going to ever happen. So the problem with this is that our hope is, and what it has demonstrated really well with the research from the pharmaceutical companies as well as independent studies, it has shown that it reduces the symptoms, and so because of that, you may not end up in the hospital and may have less chance of dying. And if you have it, you could be asymptomatic and coughing and spreading it. Yeah, absolutely. And so that's why you're seeing people say, wear the mask when you're in close quarters with people, wash your hands frequently, social distance a little bit. If you really want to put it in perspective, this is the magic of medicine, right? All the advice I just gave you is the same advice I guarantee your grandmother or your mother told you, right? Because they learned that from the 1918 pandemic of flu in the United States, the Spanish flu, right? Which, great, we gave it the name of the Spanish flu, but it didn't come from Spain, it came from Kansas. And so guess what? That's the same thing. When you were little, what did your mom do? She'd swing her hand when you were ready to cough and she'd catch that cough for you, right? And when you got older and you coughed or sneezed in your hand, she'd always tell you, cover your mouth when you cough or sneeze, right? Now go wash your hand. We got so innate with people not even covering their mouth, we had to switch up to, hey, cough into your elbow. I think that's a little grosser. It's hard to wash my elbow, right? But all of that stuff, washing your hands, right? Soap and water works fine. You don't need to use all this alcohol stuff. Soap and water works perfectly fine. Making sure that you're covering your mouth, staying home when you're sick, right? Don't come to work when you're sick because you're going to expose everybody else, whether it's the COVID or flu, right? So these are the things that our parents and our grandparents taught us. And guess what? That's what we're telling you in medicine today. So I don't need the government to be my mom and dad. I think I learned those lessons from them fairly well, as all of you did. And so that's where we look at all of that. All of those things that I just told you are tools in the toolbox to reduce the spread of the virus. Did I get both those questions okay, Jean Marie, or did I leave something out?
I think you did a great job. We had a question about talking about the vaccine and younger children.
Yeah, right now, Pfizer is approved for the age 16 and above. Moderna is going through the FDA application process to get its final approval. When it is approved, it'll probably be for 18 years of age and older. Right now, the challenge is for that 12-year-old and below population, and that's a bit tricky right now. There are studies going on. They're trying to determine, what is the appropriate dose? Do they need the full adult dose or can they get away with one shot? And so that's what's being studied right now. I do see that we have a lot of kids coming down with COVID, right? You saw it in the schools here in Florida. They're mandating these masks and what have you. Kids are going home, they're playing Xbox, they're just fine. The parents are getting COVID that aren't vaccinated and they're getting sick as dogs, which is troubling. I would just say that right now we're not seeing the death rate in the pediatric and the children population spiking. We are seeing more kids ending up in the ICU that are below the age of 2, from 0 to 2 years of age. But we also are seeing a lot of RSV, respiratory syncytial virus, right now this time of year. Usually that's in the fall months. Maybe the mask that we were doing all last year and the first part of this year decreased that, and you'll see people talking about that, but I can't put any data to support that just yet. So right now, I think we probably will see something for the pediatric population, but that'll probably be next year. I don't think it's going to be this year. I might be wrong on that, but that's just kind of what my gut is telling me.
Thank you so much. That was a lot of great information. We're kind of over our time now, and we appreciate everyone for being here. We also encourage you to remember flu season is coming, so it's a good thing to also get your flu shots. I've been out doing some testing in the community, and we're seeing a fair amount of flu A and B already starting to be out there. So Dr. Colovos has told us at other talks that you can get both those vaccines at the same time. So if you head out to your Publix or Walgreens or anything like that, you can take care of that. If you have further questions, go ahead and send them in and we can see if we can answer those. We're going to have a frequently asked question sheet that we will get to Diane and she can pass out to you at a later time. There were a couple other questions on here about testing, and I'm just going to say you need to go speak to the HR on that policy and they can assist you with that. But thank you everyone for being here, and Dr. Colovos, thank you so much again for sharing your wisdom and your time.
Thank you all. Be safe, stay well, and think positive. It'll get you through life a lot easier. Have a great evening.
Thank you.